What if Oregon's past is not a straight line, but a palimpsest, rewritten by fire, water, and forgetting? How does a forest end up sealed inside volcanic rock at Silver Falls, its trunks exposed like time cut in half? Who arranged quiet stone circles in the Ochoco Mountains with no clear record of purpose? And why do faint roots across the razor lava of Jordan craters suggest repeated human travel where modern hikers struggle to stand? Add the whispered promise of the lost Blue Bucket Mine, gold that never leaves a confirmed scar in the ground, and a pattern emerges, evidence that feels real yet resists closure. If these traces exist, what else has Oregon erased before anyone could name it? Oregon is often framed as a landscape defined by movement, rivers cutting through basalt, glaciers retreating, forests advancing and burning back again. In recorded history, it enters late, mapped gradually by explorers, settlers, and surveyors who believed they were encountering largely untouched land. But that assumption depends on what is considered evidence. Across Oregon, there are traces that do not fit comfortably into linear timelines. They are not cities, monuments, or written records. They are fragments, embedded in rock, scattered across lava fields, or quietly eroding in remote basins. Individually, each trace can be explained. Collectively, they suggest something harder to ignore: human presence and environmental upheaval reaching far deeper into the past than casual observation allows. This is a region shaped by geological violence. Volcanoes have buried forests without burning them. Lava has flowed fast enough to erase landscapes, yet slowly enough to preserve their outlines. Rivers have shifted courses, cutting through layers of time and exposing what was never meant to be seen again. In many places, the land has acted as both destroyer and archivist, erasing context while preserving form. Human history here follows a similar pattern. The earliest people did not leave stone cities or metal tools meant to endure. They moved, adapted, and carried knowledge in memory rather than maps. Routes were walked, not built. Markers were subtle, meant for those who already knew how to read the land. When those traditions broke, through displacement, climate shifts, or time itself, the meaning of what remained faded quickly. What survives today is incomplete by nature: a pair of sandals abandoned near an ancient lake, stone arrangements whose purpose cannot be dated with certainty, rock art whose symbols outlasted the language that gave them meaning, a gold legend tied to a real person yet never anchored to a verifiable place. None of these overturn established history. That is not their role. Their significance lies elsewhere. They expose the limits of certainty. They show how easily entire chapters can exist without becoming part of official narratives. In Oregon, absence is not proof of non-existence. It is often the result of landscapes that changed too fast and cultures that left lightly. The 10 discoveries that follow do not argue for lost super-civilizations or forbidden knowledge. They ask a narrower, more difficult question: how much of human history is shaped not by what happened, but by what survived long enough to be recognized? 1. The Buried Forest at Silver Falls State Park. At Silver Falls, the anomaly does not announce itself. Visitors arrive for waterfalls and shaded trails, for the sound of water echoing through a narrow canyon carved into basalt. Only after lingering, after looking past the obvious, does something unsettling emerge from the cliff walls behind the falling water. Tree trunks appear where trees should not exist. They protrude directly from solid volcanic rock. Their ends are flat, as if cut cleanly. In places, bark texture is still visible. Some trunks stand upright, others lie sideways, locked into the stone at unnatural angles. They are not recent debris, and they are not fully petrified. They occupy an in-between state that resists quick classification. Long before the canyon existed, this area supported a living forest. Trees grew in soil, rooted in a landscape that looked nothing like the one seen today. Then a series of volcanic events altered everything. Instead of slow ashfall, dense volcanic mud flows, lahars, raced across the land. These flows were heavy, fast, and destructive, capable of burying entire forests in minutes. The trees did not burn away. They were knocked down, snapped, and sealed beneath thick layers of volcanic material. As additional flows accumulated, pressure increased, oxygen disappeared, time passed. What had been a forest was compressed into darkness and isolation. Much later, water returned as an excavator. Streams carved downward through the hardened layers, cutting a canyon where none had existed. In doing so, they sliced through the buried forest, exposing cross-sections of trunks embedded in basalt walls. What had been hidden by catastrophe was revealed by erosion. From a geological standpoint, the process is understood. The mechanics are documented. Yet standing in front of those trunks produces a different response. Wood represents growth, continuity, and renewal. Basalt represents fire, collapse, and finality. Seeing one trapped inside the other creates a visual contradiction that is difficult to ignore. The buried forest raises a more troubling implication. If erosion had followed a slightly different path, these remains would still be invisible. There would be no sign that a forest ever stood here, no trace, no question. Silver Falls demonstrates that preservation is often accidental, and that absence in the record may say more about exposure than about reality. This site does not challenge scientific explanation. It challenges perception. It shows how entire ecosystems can vanish abruptly, leaving behind evidence only when chance allows. The forest at Silver Falls is not mysterious because it defies understanding, but because it reveals how much history can exist without ever demanding attention. What is visible here is not the rule, it is the exception. 2. Petroglyphs along the Cosmic River gorges. Along the Columbia River, stone faces once carried messages meant to last longer than voices. They were not raised monuments or towering markers. They were quiet carvings, incised directly into rock surfaces near the river's edge and along elevated viewpoints. Today, many of them are gone. What remains is fragmented, displaced, and difficult to interpret. The petroglyphs that survive depict human figures, animals, and abstract forms. Some are simple, others are layered and complex. Their placement suggests intention rather than decoration. Certain panels face the river, positioned where movement, trade, and seasonal travel would have been constant. Others occupy higher ground, overlooking wide stretches of water and land. No single interpretation explains them all. Local indigenous peoples have lived along the Columbia for thousands of years, and it is reasonable to associate these carvings with their ancestors. Yet clear, continuous oral histories explaining the specific meanings of each symbol have not survived in a form that can be universally applied. Languages shifted, communities were displaced, context thinned over time. What remains is form without translation. The difficulty is not proving that these carvings are ancient or human-made. That is widely accepted. The difficulty lies in understanding what kind of knowledge they were meant to preserve. Were they territorial markers, records of events? Spiritual symbols tied to places rather than people? Or visual stories meant to be read only by those already initiated? Complicating matters further is the transformation of the landscape itself. Modern infrastructure altered the river's flow and shoreline. Entire rock faces were submerged or destroyed. Panels once visible for centuries disappeared beneath water or were damaged beyond recognition. The record was not simply lost to time, it was interrupted. What remains today is therefore incomplete by default. Researchers work with partial panels, displaced stones, and historical photographs of carvings that no longer exist. Interpretation becomes cautious by necessity. Without full context, certainty is impossible. Standing near these sites now, the experience is subdued. There are no clear signs explaining what to think, no reconstructed narratives, just stone, water, and absence. The carvings do not demand belief. They demand restraint. The petroglyphs of the Columbia River Gorge illustrate a central problem in studying deep human history. When meaning is separated from its cultural framework, symbols become ambiguous. They do not vanish, but they fall silent. These carvings do not point to lost civilizations or hidden technologies. They point to something narrower and more difficult, a system of communication that worked perfectly in its time, then outlived the world that understood it. What survives is not a message, but the proof that one once existed. 3. Traces of ancient residents at Fort Rock Basins. Fort Rock Basin today appears dry, open, and quiet. The landscape gives little indication that it was once dominated by water. Yet thousands of years ago, this basin held a substantial lake, shaping how people lived, moved, and survived in what is now south-central Oregon. The most direct evidence of that human presence is surprisingly modest: woven sandals. These sandals were not discovered in a ceremonial context or associated with monumental structures. They were found in caves near the former shoreline, discarded, worn, and ordinary. That ordinariness is precisely what gives them weight. Unlike symbolic objects, footwear is practical. It exists because people walked here repeatedly over long periods. Radiocarbon dating placed several of these sandals at over 10,000 years old. This does not merely extend Oregon's timeline of human presence, it anchors it to daily life. Someone made these sandals, wore them, repaired them, and eventually left them behind when they were no longer useful. At the time they were used, Fort Rock Basin was a productive environment. Water supported plant growth, animals followed predictable patterns, and travel around the lake would have been easier than crossing the volcanic terrain that surrounds the basin today. The sandals suggest adaptation, not permanence. These were people moving through a landscape they understood, not settling in ways that demanded durable architecture. Then the environment changed. As the climate shifted, the lake receded. Shorelines moved, resources disappeared or relocated. What had once been a livable basin became increasingly dry and unreliable. There is no clear sign of collapse, conflict, or sudden abandonment. Instead, the evidence points to gradual withdrawal, people adjusting routes, following water elsewhere, leaving behind only what they could not or did not need to carry. The sandals remained because caves offered protection. Dry conditions preserved organic material that would have decayed almost anywhere else. Their survival is therefore accidental. Had they been left in open ground, nothing would remain. This raises a broader issue. If such a basic object can persist for millennia under the right conditions, how many similar traces vanished simply because the land was less forgiving? Fort Rock Basin does not suggest a lost city or forgotten civilization. It suggests something quieter and more difficult to categorize. A long span of human presence defined by movement, flexibility, and impermanence. History here was not built to last. It lasted only because chance allowed it to. The sandals do not answer who these people were in any comprehensive sense. They answer a narrower question, one often overlooked. Someone walked here, and they did so long before anyone thought to record it. 4. Early human traces at Paisley Caves. Paisley Caves do not look dramatic. They sit quietly in the high desert of south-central Oregon, shallow rock shelters overlooking a dry basin. There are no towering walls or deep chambers. At first glance, nothing about them suggests they would become one of the most debated archaeological sites in North America. The significance lies not in the caves themselves, but in what was found inside them. During systematic excavations, researchers uncovered organic material embedded in layered sediments. Among these remains were small, unremarkable fragments, coprolites, or fossilized human waste. They were easy to overlook, yet when tested, they produced results that unsettled long-standing assumptions. DNA analysis indicated a human presence in the region more than 14,000 years ago. If correct, this places people in Oregon earlier than traditional migration models once allowed. It suggests that humans moved through or occupied parts of the interior Pacific Northwest far sooner than expected, possibly using routes that left little physical trace. The finding did not go unchallenged. Critics questioned whether the samples had been contaminated by later material. Others argued that DNA alone, without associated tools or clear habitation layers, could not definitively rewrite timelines. The debate was technical, cautious, and ongoing. No single discovery here forced consensus. That uncertainty is central to the site's importance. Paisley Caves do not provide a clean narrative. They offer evidence that is strong enough to demand attention, but incomplete enough to resist closure. The caves contain stone tools, animal remains, and layered sediments that point to repeated use over long periods. Yet the deeper question, how early humans arrived, how long they stayed, and how they moved across the landscape remains unresolved. What makes Paisley different from more visible sites is the nature of its record. There are no structures, no symbolic carvings, no durable artifacts meant to endure. The evidence is biological, fragile, and easily erased. It survived only because dry conditions slowed decay and because it was sealed beneath layers of sediment before disturbance. This forces a recalibration of how early history is recognized. If presence can be confirmed through such minimal traces, then absence elsewhere may be misleading. People may have passed through many regions without leaving anything that modern archaeology expects to find. Paisley Caves do not claim a lost culture or forgotten civilization. They suggest something more restrained, that early human movement was flexible, opportunistic, and lightly imprinted on the land. The site matters not because it provides final answers, but because it demonstrates how narrow the margin is between discovery and invisibility. History here survives not as a monument, but as residue. 5. Lava-cast forest at Newberry National Volcanic Monument. In Central Oregon, the ground tells a story without words. The surface is dark, uneven, and fractured. Hardened lava stretched across the landscape like a frozen wave. At first glance, it appears lifeless, but beneath that surface lies the outline of a forest that no longer exists. Thousands of years ago, this area supported living trees. They grew in loose soil, drawing water from a climate that was cooler and more stable than today. When volcanic activity intensified, lava advanced through the forest. It did not move fast enough to instantly incinerate everything, nor slow enough to spare what stood in its path. Instead, it flowed around tree trunks, engulfing them at the base. As the lava cooled, the trees burned away from the inside. What remained were hollow, vertical molds, stone cylinders preserving the exact dimensions of trunks that had once been alive. These are not fossils in the traditional sense. No wood remains, only absence shaped by heat and pressure. The result is the lava-cast forest. Walking through it is disorienting. The landscape shows no greenery, yet it bears unmistakable signs of growth. The molds stand like negative space made solid, evidence of life recorded by destruction rather than preservation. Unlike buried forests where organic material survives, this site preserves shape without substance. Geology explains the process clearly. Lava temperatures were high enough to consume wood, but not violent enough to collapse the surrounding structure. Cooling occurred at the right pace to hold form. The conditions were precise. Slight changes in flow speed, temperature, or moisture would have erased everything. That precision matters. It underscores how narrow the margin is between complete loss and accidental record. The forest is remembered here not because it was important, but because circumstances aligned. Countless other forests may have been erased entirely by similar events, leaving no imprint at all. There is no evidence that people witnessed this transformation. No tools or artifacts connect human presence directly to the moment the lava arrived. The forest's significance is environmental rather than cultural, yet it plays a crucial role in understanding Oregon's deeper history. It demonstrates that landscapes can archive what living memory cannot. It shows how fire can function as a recording medium, capturing outlines that time alone would dissolve. And it complicates assumptions about permanence. Trees are often treated as symbols of endurance. Here, they survive only as voids. The lava-cast forest does not suggest mystery in the supernatural sense. It suggests something more unsettling, that the land keeps its own records, independent of human intention. What we see is not what was saved, but what could not be erased fast enough. 6. Lava tubes at Newberry Volcano. Beneath the surface of Central Oregon, another landscape exists, one shaped not by erosion, but by movement trapped in place. When lava flowed from Newberry Volcano, its outer layer cooled first, forming a hardened shell. Inside, molten rock continued to move. When that flow finally drained away, it left behind long, hollow corridors known as lava tubes. From above, nothing suggests what lies below. The ground appears solid and unremarkable, but openings in the lava reveal passages that stretch for hundreds, sometimes thousands of meters. The most well-known of these is accessible today. yet large portions of the underground system remain unmapped or only partially explored. Geologically, lava tubes are well understood. Their formation follows predictable rules. What is less clear is how early people interacted with them. There is evidence that indigenous groups in the region were aware of these caves long before modern documentation. The tubes offered stable temperatures year-round, protection from weather, and darkness that preserved organic material. In a volcanic landscape with few natural shelters, such spaces would have been valuable. What remains uncertain is the extent and nature of their use. No permanent habitation structures have been identified inside the tubes. There are no clear occupation layers comparable to open-air sites or rock shelters. Instead, the record is sparse, suggestive rather than conclusive. This raises questions about whether the tubes were used temporarily, seasonally, or for purposes not easily visible in the archaeological record. Part of the difficulty lies in preservation. Underground environments are sensitive. Small disturbances can erase subtle traces. Modern visitation complicates interpretation as later activity can obscure or overwrite earlier signs. In some cases, the absence of evidence may reflect caution rather than lack of use. The lava tubes challenge a common assumption that meaningful human interaction with a landscape must leave durable marks. These spaces may have been known, entered, and relied upon without ever becoming sites of prolonged occupation. Knowledge of their locations could have been passed orally, then lost when those traditions ended. Today, standing inside a lava tube, the experience is disorienting. Sound is muted, light disappears quickly, the rock walls curve smoothly, bearing the texture of flowing stone frozen mid-motion. It feels unfinished, as if the earth paused rather than settled. The lava tubes do not present a mystery because they are unexplained. They present one because they sit at the boundary of visibility. They represent places that could have mattered deeply to people who left no durable signal behind. Like many sites in Oregon, their importance lies not in what they prove, but in what they make possible, and how easily that possibility can fade from the record. 7. Ancient travel routes at Jordan Craters. Jordan Craters is one of the most physically demanding landscapes in Oregon. The ground is a field of hardened lava, sharp, broken, and uneven. There is little water, almost no shade, and long distances between recognizable landmarks. Even experienced hikers move slowly here, placing each step with care. At first glance, it appears to be a place people would avoid. Yet subtle patterns suggest the opposite. Across the lava, faint corridors emerge, areas where movement feels marginally easier, where rock edges are worn smoother, where natural fractures align into narrow passages. These are not roads in any modern sense. There are no carved paths, no raised borders, no continuous tracks. What exists instead are preferences, choices repeated often enough to leave a trace. Archaeologists believe these routes form through repeated human movement across the lava fields. For ancient travelers, Jordan Craters was not empty space. It was an obstacle that had to be crossed to reach water sources, hunting grounds, seasonal camps, or distant trade connections. Avoiding it entirely would have meant long detours through equally harsh terrain. Movement here required knowledge. The safest paths were not obvious. They depended on recognizing which lava formations were stable, where sharp edges could be bypassed, and where natural gaps reduced injury. Over time, repeated passage would subtly shape these choices into informal routes, remembered rather than constructed. Some researchers suggest that stone cairns may once have marked parts of these crossings. Small piles of rock could guide travelers across dangerous stretches, especially in low light or poor weather. Most of these markers, if they existed, would have collapsed or been scattered long ago. What remains today is ambiguous. Stone groupings that could be intentional or accidental, difficult to classify with certainty. This ambiguity is the core challenge. Lava does not record movement clearly. It preserves neither footprints nor wheel ruts. Evidence survives only indirectly, through patterns that can easily be dismissed as natural variation. Studied individually, each sign is weak. Considered together, they suggest intention. Modern avoidance of the lava fields may be what preserved these traces. As roads and settlements expanded elsewhere, Jordan Craters became a place people went around, not through. That isolation limited disturbance, allowing faint patterns to persist. Standing in the lava today, the scale is overwhelming. The field stretches outward with little visual reference. In such an environment, knowing where to walk was not convenience. It was survival. The routes mattered because they reduced injury, conserved energy, and connected people across inhospitable land. Jordan Craters does not reveal a lost highway or forgotten civilization. It reveals something more restrained, evidence of adaptation. People learned the land well enough to move through it repeatedly, leaving behind only the lightest imprint. The routes exist not as lines on a map, but as memory etched briefly into stone, visible only if one knows how to look. 8. Stone cairns in Eastern Oregon. Across Eastern Oregon, small piles of stacked stone appear in places that feel intentionally chosen, on ridgelines, near open flats, or along subtle breaks in the terrain. They are easy to miss. They are also easy to misinterpret. These stone cairns are simple. A handful of rocks placed one atop another. No mortar, no carving, no clear alignment that immediately signals age or function. Yet their locations suggest purpose. They often sit where visibility matters, where orientation becomes difficult, or where movement across open land would benefit from guidance. The challenge is not recognizing the cairns. The challenge is understanding them. In many cultures, cairns have served practical roles, marking routes, signaling boundaries, or identifying safe passages through difficult ground. In others, they have carried ceremonial meaning, tied to memory, mourning, or ritual obligation. In Eastern Oregon, distinguishing between these possibilities is rarely straightforward. Part of the problem is interference. Over time, modern visitors have added stones, rebuilt collapsed piles, or created new cairns entirely, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes for navigation, sometimes without understanding the consequences. Each added rock blurs the original pattern. Once altered, a cairn's context is lost permanently. This creates a paradox. The more attention cairns receive, the less reliable they become as evidence. Archaeologists approach these features cautiously. Without associated artifacts, datable material, or consistent patterns, it is difficult to assign age or intent. A cairn built centuries ago can look nearly identical to one stacked last weekend. In an open landscape shaped by wind and seasonal change, even natural rock accumulations can resemble human construction. Yet dismissing all cairns as modern or meaningless ignores their distribution. Some appear in clusters that align with known movement corridors. Others occupy positions that make sense only if they were meant to be seen from a distance. These placements suggest that at least some cairns once functioned as part of a broader system, one that relied on recognition rather than permanence. If so, that system would have been fragile by design. It would have depended on shared knowledge rather than physical durability. Once the knowledge ended, the stones lost their clarity. The cairns of Eastern Oregon do not point to lost civilizations or complex engineering. They point to something quieter, communication that assumed familiarity with the land, markers meant for people who already knew how to read them. Today, what remains is ambiguity. Each cairn asks the same question: is this signal original or noise added later? And without context, that question often cannot be answered. Their significance lies not in certainty, but in vulnerability. These stones show how easily functional history can dissolve, one moved rock at a time. 9 stone structures in the Ochoko Mountains. The Ochoko Mountains do not dominate the horizon. They are old, worn down, and broad, forested ridges rather than dramatic peaks. It is a landscape shaped by time more than force. That quiet character is what makes the stone structures scattered across these mountains so noticeable once they are seen. They do not resemble ruins in the conventional sense. There are no standing walls or collapsed buildings. Instead, the features are subtle. Low stone alignments, circular enclosures, short walls that end abruptly, and stacked arrangements that seem too deliberate to be random. The stones are local, unshaped, and carefully placed. Their simplicity complicates interpretation. No clear tools, carvings, or datable materials are associated with the structures. Without those anchors, assigning age or purpose becomes difficult. They could be hunting aids, walls designed to guide animals. They could be temporary shelters or food processing areas. Some may have served ceremonial functions, positioned on elevated ground with wide views of surrounding valleys. Local indigenous peoples have moved through this region for thousands of years, making it reasonable to associate the structures with their ancestors. Yet no widely shared oral histories explain these exact sites in detail. That absence does not imply insignificance. It reflects the fragility of cultural continuity when landscapes change and communities are disrupted. More speculative claims occasionally surface, suggesting the structures are far older than known regional histories. These claims gain momentum because the stones appear weathered and carefully arranged, but speculation outpaces evidence. Without datable context, such assertions remain unproven. What is clear is that the structures are not modern. Early settlers described stone features already present when they arrived. They do not align with ranching practices or fencing patterns. Someone placed them intentionally, for reasons that mattered at the time. Walking among these structures today feels different from visiting a curated archaeological site. There are no signs explaining what to think, no reconstructions. The forest moves around them. Wind passes through trees. The stones sit low and quiet, not demanding attention but holding it once noticed. Their vulnerability is immediate. Because they are unprotected and easily altered, even minor disturbance can erase information permanently. Stones moved out of curiosity or rearranged for visibility destroy original patterns. Once context is lost, it cannot be recovered. The Ochoko stone structures do not argue for hidden histories beyond human reach. They argue for restraint. They remind us that meaningful human activity does not always leave loud evidence. Some histories were built close to the ground, and that is precisely why they are so easy to overlook. 10. The Lost Blue Bucket Mine. The Lost Blue Bucket Mine exists in no fixed location. It drifts across Oregon's high desert, carried by secondhand accounts, journal fragments, and the enduring belief that something valuable was once found and then lost again. The story traces back to the mid-19th century and centers on a frontier guide named Stephen Meek. During his travels through central and eastern Oregon, Meek claimed to have discovered gold-bearing ore. He reportedly carried samples in a blue metal bucket, enough to convince others that the find was real. What he never provided were reliable directions. Some versions place the discovery along a shortcut, Meek promoted across the high desert, a route later associated with suffering and death. Wagons broke down, water ran out, landmarks blurred together under stress. Others suggest the gold was found during earlier trapping trips and intentionally kept secret. Over time, the story fractured. Prospectors searched the Ochoko Mountains, the Blue Mountains, the John Day Basin, and dry volcanic terrain far to the south. Hand-drawn maps circulated, copies of copies marked with landmarks that no longer existed, a bent juniper, a split rock, a creek that may have dried up long ago. No confirmed mine was ever found. Historians approach the legend cautiously. Some believe the ore Meek carried was low quality, misinterpreted under conditions of hope and scarcity. Others think it came from a known source and was later romanticized. Meek himself was known to exaggerate and to make questionable decisions, complicating any assessment of his claims. And yet, the legend persists. That persistence is not driven by evidence, but by plausibility. In the 1840s, much of Oregon was unmapped. Trails were informal. Distances were poorly understood. A real discovery could be lost simply through memory failure and environmental change. Basalt ridges hide canyons. Fires alter vegetation. Soil shifts after heavy rain. What might have been visible once could now be buried or destroyed. The absence of proof does not fully close the door. The Lost Blue Bucket Mine matters less as a treasure story than as a reflection of frontier psychology. It captures how uncertainty, ambition, and incomplete knowledge can transform a moment into a legacy. It shows how easily history bends when desire fills the gaps. There is no marked site today, no tailings, No verified shaft, only landscape and a story that refuses to settle. When history refuses to be complete. Taken individually, none of these discoveries overturn established history. They do not prove lost civilizations, impossible technologies, or hidden worlds beneath Oregon's surface. That is not their function. What they reveal is something more restrained and more unsettling. History is not a complete record. It is a reconstruction assembled from fragments that survived erosion, collapse, neglect, and chance. What we call the past is shaped as much by what endured as by what did not. In Oregon, the land itself determines which stories remain visible. A forest can vanish in minutes and survive only as an outline in stone. Human movement can shape lava into roots without ever forming a road. Knowledge can be carried without maps, then disappear when memory breaks. Symbols can outlast language. Legends can persist without proof. In several cases, science offers clear explanations. Geological processes explain buried forests and lava molds. Archaeology grounds early human presence in physical evidence. In other cases, the record is simply incomplete. Dating ranges overlap. Context is missing. Certainty remains out of reach. This does not weaken history, it defines it. The danger lies not in asking difficult questions, but in answering them too quickly. These sites remind us that much of human experience was never designed to last. It mattered deeply at the time, then faded without ceremony. Oregon's mysteries do not demand belief. They demand humility. They ask us to accept that entire chapters can exist without monuments, without writing, and without closure. And they leave one final question unresolved. How much of our own world will remain legible when only fragments are left behind?